If you've been scrolling through endless spec sheets, watching YouTube unboxings, and still can't decide whether a high-end workstation is worth the plunge, this review is here to cut through the noise. I've spent the past week mapping out how a machine like the HP Z2 G1i fits into a real-world studio, and I'm going to walk you through the moments that matter before you click Add to Cart. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the kind of day this box is built for. Imagine you're a 3D artist who's juggling a massive scene in Blender, a complex particle simulation in Houdini, and a multi-track video render for a client deadline. You've already upgraded your monitors, you've got a fast SSD for project files, but the CPU still feels like a bottleneck when you hit the final render button. That's the exact scenario where the Z2 G1i starts to feel like a partner rather than a piece of hardware. The Ultra-Core 7265K sits in the sweet spot between raw core count and single-thread performance, which means you'll see noticeable time savings on both multi-threaded workloads and those occasional single-threaded tasks like texture baking. Now, before you picture an expensive monolith that eats up floor space, consider the actual footprint. The tower is a standard mid-tower chassis with a fairly compact width, so it'll slide into a typical workstation desk without needing a dedicated server rack. The side panels are removable, which is a small convenience that matters when you need to swap out a drive or add a second GPU in a pinch. That said, the chassis isn't the lightest. It weighs in at just over 30 pounds, so you'll want a solid desk that can hold it steady. If you're planning to move the workstation between rooms, factor in a dolly or a sturdy cart. Memory is another key piece of the puzzle, and the Z2 G1i comes with 32 GB of DDR4 RAM pre-installed. For most video editing and CAD tasks, 32 GB feels comfortable, but if you're routinely working with 8 KB textures or multi-camera VR projects, you might find yourself hitting that ceiling sooner rather than later. The good news is that the board supports up to 128 GB, so there's headroom to upgrade without swapping the entire motherboard. The real takeaway? The stock memory gives you a safe baseline, but the upgrade path is there if your workload grows. Storage-wise, the 1TB NVIDIA SSD feels like a generous slice of speed. When you open a 10 GB project file, it practically snaps open in under a second, and loading times for software suites like Autodesk Maya or Adobe Premiere Pro are dramatically reduced compared to a traditional SATA drive. However, the single drive bay means you'll have to decide whether you want that terabyte to hold both your OS and all your active project files, or to allocate it just for the OS and add external storage for bulk data. In practice, many pros pair the internal SSD with a large external RAID array for long-term archives, and the built-in Ethernet port makes that a seamless workflow. Graphics is where the Z2 G1i really tries to stand out. The NVIDIA 20GB card isn't a consumer-grade GeForce, it's a workstation-grade GPU tuned for professional workloads. In real tests, the extra VRAM shines when you're dealing with high-resolution textures or complex shading networks. If you're editing 8K footage or running real-time ray tracing in a design application, you'll notice fewer frame drops and smoother viewport interaction. For someone who only needs a card for occasional gaming or basic 2D design, that 20 GB is overkill, and the price tag reflects that. So, if your day-to-day includes GPU-intensive renders, you'll get a clear benefit. Otherwise, you might be paying for horsepower you'll rarely tap. One area that many buyers overlook is the inclusion of Windows 11 Pro. It's not just a branding bump. The Pro Edition brings native support for Hyper-V and enhanced security features that matter in a corporate environment. If you're a freelancer handling sensitive client data, the ability to set up isolated virtual machines without third-party software can save both time and money. On the flip side, the OS does come with a learning curve if you haven't dealt with pro-level policies before, so there's a small onboarding cost in terms of time. Who should walk away from this machine? If you're a hobbyist who edits 1080p video on a weekend, a decent mid-range laptop will probably serve you just as well for a fraction of the cost. Likewise, if your primary work is spreadsheet analysis or web development, you'll likely never tap the GPU or need the massive core count, making the Z2 G1i an unnecessary expense. On the other hand, studios, small animation firms, and freelance visual effects artists will find the blend of CPU, GPU, and fast storage aligns tightly with their daily grind. The hidden trade-off is the upgrade path. You can add memory and storage later, but the GPU is soldered in place, so if you ever need more graphics horsepower, you'll be looking at a whole new system. From